Important topics of the day. This program is for critical thinkers. And now, here's your host, integrated media professor, longtime Spokane Talk radio personality, and award-winning broadcast veteran, Mike Fitzsimmons.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this edition of For Critical Thinkers. We always begin every show with a definition of what critical thinking is all about. That is our objective. Some may suggest that I'm trying to talk you into seeing things the way I see them, and no, that is not the case. I'm not interested in whether or not I can convert you. I'm only interested in whether or not I can prompt you to do some serious thinking about the things that are important to you, and if you do that, my task is completed. Critical thinking is very simply this: the objective analysis and the evaluation of an issue in order to make a judgment, to form a judgment about that particular issue. It's a really important aspect to understand, because I don't have a problem with the fact that a lot of folks don't know a lot of things. They can be taught that. In other words, ignorance can be overcome by information. But individuals who do not know how to analyze information very often are prone to fall victim to it and not understand why that has happened. And we're hoping that we can avoid doing that, and that's the purpose of this particular program. Now, to begin with, let's talk about how you can join me on the program while we are live today. And here's how you do it. You go simply to Sam at SpokaneTalksMedia.com. Sam is our producer. Sam will give you a numerical password and an instruction as to how to apply that to the gateway to getting on board this program. Simple as that. And then you, as long as you have a microphone and a camera, of course, are going to be able to talk directly with me. And we hope that you will. I always like to discuss things with people. I realize it's slightly short notice for some of you relative to that, but that's how we will do this. And I also want to thank, before we get into it today, our alternate benefactor, our sponsor, Stephen Major. Stephen, whose support is vital to this program's success, has been a big believer in what we're doing here, and I appreciate it very, very much, Stephen. Thank you, sir. Danger, media present. I am not one who believes that the media is the enemy of the people. I really don't believe that. But I do believe that it becomes an enemy, a danger, and must be watched carefully when it oversteps, when it steps out of line, when it lies to us, when it tells us stories that are not true and doesn't seek to remedy that situation. Then I become suspicious. Not all media does it. Not all medias do it together or at the same time or whatever, but the point is it does happen. And when it does, that information, if allowed to continue to fester, is, I think, a danger to the people. And that's why I say danger media present. I'm telling you, essentially, do not trust the media. I mean, you can certainly rely on it. That's fine. You rely on it the way you rely on a canoe. There are certain things you can do in a canoe, and if you maintain its stability, you're not going to get wet. But there are certain things that can happen that will result in a capsizing, and if that occurs, you're in danger. And the media is kind of the same way. Respect it. It's kind of like a wild animal to a certain extent. You can never be sure that it's 100% reliable, so have a healthy skepticism with respect to the media, especially now, because the media has changed its spots rather dramatically. The media is enabled in this country by a process that is unlike anything any other country in the history of mankind has experienced. We have a First Amendment, and that First Amendment reads as follows: Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, the freedom of the press, or the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievance. That's only 45 words. Not a very large amendment. It deals with 5 major rights of ours, 5 important rights that we Americans enjoy. And some of them are embattled as we speak. In the present era, some of them are under assault. There is plenty of room when it's only 45 words and 5 major issues for interpretation, and that has been the case all along. The courts have interpreted. But I believe that if the Founding Fathers could see our media today, if they could see what we have become in the media, they might very well not have made possible the freedoms of the press that the press currently enjoys. They might rethink the whole process. And I think it would be predicated in large measure on the issue that power corrupts. The media is perhaps the single most powerful institution in our society today. Absolute power, as the saying goes, corrupts absolutely. And since the Founding Fathers could not have seen the electronic media, when they passed the First Amendment, of course, in 1791, the major press, if you will, the mainstream media, if you will, was print media, newspapers. And because of a lack of ability to read and write that so many people had at that time, the media actually was consumable only by those who were able to read and write. And since that was the case, you had a very limited number of folks whose minds could be changed and whose hearts could be changed by the content of media publications. But a lot has changed now. And unfortunately, the media, which at one time was supposed to be objective and which at one time practiced the theory that we're going to give you the information and then we'll leave it to you to decide what it means to you, they've sold out on us. They've simply sold out on us. And what the founders thought the media would be is not what the media has turned out to be. The founders thought it was going to be the watchdog, going to sit on the porch, of course, and if anything was out of the ordinary or anything was awry, the dog would bark, would warn us, we the people, that something was not right. And then we would be in a position to be able to rectify that situation. Well, they've been a watchdog off and on, but the further we got from the actual drafting of the First Amendment to the present day, the less watchdog we had and the more advocate we had and the more adventuresome the media became to act in its own best interest and those of its allies. Journalism, therefore, today is less about news and information and more about advancing agendas. Media has always been aware of, the news media particularly, always been aware of its power. And advocacy was not really unexpected because, let's face it, journalists had the power of the pen. That concept was as old as the hills. We always knew that journalists had power. But we also expected that journalists would practice objectivity. And that's where we fell short. Because now the news media has power that we had never expected that it would have, simply because it is acting in its own interest in many respects and not in the interest of the consumer of news and information. The news media chooses what we think about. Stop and think about it. Look at that statement and ask yourself, what does that mean to me? News media chooses what we should think about. How do they do that? They don't ask me what they're going to publish. They publish it and they give it to me. The newspaper appears in my mailbox or news box or on my porch or on my television broadcast, if it's network or local. And they have the opportunity as the gatekeepers, if you will. They have the opportunity to decide what it is they're going to publish. Gatekeepers simply are the folks who allow you in and allow you out. And the media is a gatekeeper. The media selects the stories. They are entirely in control of the information that gets passed on to you and me as consumers of news and information. Reporters and editors, and in the modern era, the bloggers and such, they're the gatekeepers. And since there are thousands of stories to tell, and to some extent, please appreciate that this is a practical matter. There's so little time in a broadcast, in the electronic media, radio or television. Half hour, less commercials and all that sort of thing. So the net amount is approximately 22 minutes for most broadcasts. And there are hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of stories every day that perhaps would merit your attention. But you can't put them all on the newscast and you can't put them all in a newspaper. If you put all the stories in a newspaper that there were to tell today, you'd have to have a semi-truck deliver it because it would weigh as much as a car. I mean, let's be realistic about that. So part of the process of gatekeeping is just simply a practical process, but it isn't merely that. It is also a process that is governed by what the media wants us to know. The facts. What are the facts? What are the facts in any story? The media reports what they want you to know. Now, sometimes that's very good-natured and obviously in good faith, but they report to you the facts that they want you to know. That is to say, they no longer just give you facts, they give you some facts, or perhaps they give you no facts. In reporting facts, that's where you have to be very careful, and that's where critical thinking comes in. That's where you have to objectively analyze a particular story and ask yourself, well, is there more to this than they're telling me? When you evaluate something that you're given in the form of a newspaper article or the form of a piece on television, you have to ask yourself, what else is there? What are the motivations of the people who are telling me these things? What are the motivations of the people who told them whatever the quote is in a newscast or a newspaper article? What do these folks want? Who are they? What are their motivations? It is a process that very often involves the following things: over-reporting, under-reporting, framing, and fabrication. Now, fabrication, let's start with that one on the bottom. That's fake news. Fabrication is simply telling you a story and saying some leaders that we have, some special people in high places whose names we cannot disclose to you, have told us something. Well, you're just taking that on faith. What if there are no real people who did tell them that? Or what if the individuals who told them that are not really knowledgeable as they say, but the reality is they can confirm perhaps one or two of the facts, if not all of them, but you're stuck with knowing the whole story and you don't know whether or not it's all true and you can't verify it. And the reason why is because you don't know where it came from. Always asking the question, where did that come from, is an important aspect when it comes to dealing with consumption of news and information. What is over-reporting then? Let's go back to that graphic one more time. Over-reporting. Over-reporting simply is to make a story bigger than it is. And let me ask producer Sam to just leave that up for a moment here because I want to discuss that a little further. Making a story bigger than it is, that's what over-reporting is, all right? Or reporting it more often than the merit of the story deserves. Under-reporting is just the opposite, making a story less important than it really is. Very often that's the case. In other words, suppressing that story, minimizing that story so that folks will say, well, that's not anything I should really be interested in. Framing. That's to prime the viewer's opinion about something. Remember, you have to prime the pump before you can take a drink. Well, that works in the dissemination of news and information also. You're priming the reader's view, the viewer's view, the listener's view of a particular subject. And you do it with words, you frame with words. For example, if I say that person is an illegal alien, okay, illegal alien, that's a negative, right? You think, well, that person's in this country illegally, right? And that person probably came across the border, probably violated the law, and we should have a certain suspicion about that person. But if the media doesn't use illegal alien, and by the way, they very seldom do, instead, what do they use? Well, they'll use undocumented immigrant. Undocumented immigrant. That doesn't sound particularly nefarious, does it? Kind of changes the way we feel about the individual that they're referring to in a particular story. Words have a way of arming or disarming individuals. Another example, for example, when we talk about abortion, if we use the word abortion, that has a certain negative connotation. That means killing babies, right? However, if we talk about reproductive health, that makes a lot more positive sense. Oh yeah, reproductive. Well, sure, reproductive health, that's all right, right? If we talk about killing your unborn child, aborting, that's particularly troubling. That language is painful for some. It may result in judgments that the media doesn't want you to make. But if we change the language to simply say a woman's right to choose, what happens? Well, now that's an important. Why shouldn't a person have a right to choose, particularly when it comes to their own health? Which, of course, it isn't their own health because there are two people involved in this exercise of right to choose. One of them is the mom, and the other one is the child. But the point is that when we use the language that makes it easier to consume, like Mary Poppins used to say, a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down. Well, then we are a little bit more, shall we say, accepting, predisposed to accept. We also manipulate individuals' perceptions of things through images, pictures, video that we show, still pictures that we show. I mean, stop and think. There are probably hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pictures, even though he's only been president for half a dozen days now, business days, of Joe Biden. But if a newspaper wants to discredit him or to in some way make you feel less than accepting of the new president, they might select from the hundreds of thousands of photos that are available a picture that makes him look stupid, that makes him look sleepy, that makes him look disconnected, whatever the case may be, in conjunction with a story that they might tell about him, or video, as that is the case. And what does that do? That changes your thought pattern with respect to that particular subject matter. It can be done with anybody. It's done, Lord knows, millions of times with President Trump over 4 years, and it's going to be done with President Biden as well. And the headline is the last way in which folks prime the pump, if you will. Misleading or headlines that are laced with some sort of presupposition about what the story is about to get you to think about something. That typically is the case. News media persuades us to adopt their agenda now. That wasn't always the case, but it is now. Persuading us to adopt their agenda. In other words, to make the story bigger than it is, to falsely incorporate information that will persuade form of selling. Did we ever see that before? Well, you just saw a slide there a moment ago, and we'll bring it back now. The Russia collusion hoax. We don't know what that was. For nearly 4 years, the media told the people that there was plenty of evidence all over the place with respect to Donald Trump's campaign in 2016 and before 2016, colluding with the Russians in order to get their help to get him elected president of the United States in the 2016 election. We spent almost 4 years and clearly near $40 million of your taxpayer money in order to determine whether or not that collusion ever existed. And the Mueller report, of course, came to the conclusion that it did not exist. It did not happen that way. And yet, even now, some media continues to talk about Russian collusion when it comes to discussing Trump. Now, that's what we're talking about when it comes to priming the pump and trying to predispose your understanding of things. Another example, perhaps more critical going forward, was what happened in late October when the New York Post published a series of stories about Hunter Biden, the son of the Democratic presidential nominee, and the Twitter account for the New York Post was taken down. The media destroyed the story because they were frightened that it might possibly mean that the public would become disenchanted with Joe Biden and suspicious of him and wouldn't vote for him just a few weeks later in the November 3rd general election. And so what did they do? The news media colluded. All media, major left-wing media colluded to dismiss this story. And what did they do? They used it. They used a certain terminology to describe the story. And one of it was all Russian disinformation. You had former CIA operatives and CIA executives making the statement on some of the cable news channels that this was Russian disinformation. Of course, that was a lie. There was no Russian disinformation in it at all. The Russians had absolutely nothing to do with it because the story was true. But they kept it from the public for long enough to help their candidate, their favored candidate, get elected. They did. And then later on, they had to own up for the fact that the story actually existed, that it is true, and now there is a criminal investigation underway. It, by the way, was underway even before they admitted it, but the point being that this particular story was true from the get-go, but the media didn't want you to know about it. An interesting thing about that is a Gallup poll which came out shortly after the November 3rd election, which indicated that nearly 10%, I think 9.6%, of Democrats who voted for Joe Biden stated that had they known that Joe Biden was implicated in a pay-to-play scheme for a number of years, even while he was vice president of the United States in the Obama administration, they would not have voted for him. Nearly 10%. Nearly 10%. He got 80 million votes. If it were 10%, that would be 8 million votes. Trump got 75 million, just about 75 million. That could very well have made the difference in the election. All by itself, without anything else that people are claiming went on, that by itself could have changed the whole thing. So does the news media have power? You bet they do. And one of the ways they get you to believe things is the old tell them what you want them to know again and again and again concept. This is what advertisers do all the time. The concept of ubiquity, right? This is the constant repetition of a narrative. Constant repetition of a narrative. Or what is otherwise referred to as the big lie. In advertising, the whole idea is that if you see it here and you see it there and you see it in the newspapers, the magazines, you see it on television, you see it on the back fence of the baseball park, you see it on the movie screen, you see it on the side of trucks, well, eventually you're going to have top-of-the-mind awareness of that concept. And if you have top-of-the-mind awareness of that concept, you're going to believe that concept to be true. You might even be persuaded to go purchase that product or that service. But when it comes to news, particularly fake news, ubiquity is what sells it, not truth. In other words, if you're going to tell the big lie, you got to tell it often enough, and you got to repeat it again and again and again and again. And you got to deal with a theory, if you will, or a formula, if you will. Reach, which is how many people you can reach with that particular story, plus frequency, which is how often you tell that story, how often people hear that, see that, read that, whatever the case may be, equals ubiquity. In other words, it's everywhere, and if it's everywhere, it must be true. That's how the big lie works. And that has been something that the media has been very, very skilled in doing in recent years. We're going to take a break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about other aspects of the media, particularly the news media, and then we're going to get into the whole social media issue that is a prominent part of what's happening in this early part of the 2021 year. You're listening to For Critical Thinking. I'm Mike Fitzsimmons, and we'll be right back.
When you donate to the Union Gospel Mission thrift stores, your items help change lives. The furniture your kids jumped on and fell off of. The clothes you really should get rid of, but still look fantastic in. That old lamp you've clung to for so long. Every donation stays 100% local and helps provide food, a safe and healing environment, and job training. Union Gospel Mission thrift stores. Donate your items and help real people find real change.
We believe every person is created in the image of God with immeasurable beauty and worth, that people should not be defined by their present condition or past mistakes. We are all broken. We need each other. Healing for our brokenness begins with connection, with understanding how much we are loved by a good God. And with healing comes change, the potential for joy and meaning. No one was created for mere survival on the streets, for an existence blurred by mind-numbing substances. Each person is created with a purpose, a unique gift no one else can offer the world. Our job is to help them rediscover it. Real people, real change. Union Gospel Mission.
Welcome back to For Critical Thinking. I'm Mike Fitzsimmons. Just another point to make on this business of constant repetition of the narrative. You ever notice how certain buzzwords somehow seem to show up in every kind of a report about a particular topic? Buzzwords that everybody uses. The network television news uses it, the local television news uses it, the magazines use it, the newspapers use it. It's all over social media as well, same buzzword. For example, you know that there are folks who are still smarting from the election of 2020, last November the 3rd, claiming that there was election fraud, claiming that this was something that wasn't necessarily true or right, and they want to get to the bottom of it. All right, one of the words that the media has been using, and check this, they're still using it almost every day, is baseless. Baseless, all right? The election fraud claims are baseless. Now, that's a typical example of what I'm talking about, baseless. That word is used by, where'd they all get it? Did somebody issue a memo saying, okay, now the word with respect to election fraud claims is baseless. So in your stories that you write, or in the stories that you're going to get from your wire services or whatever, that's got to be underscored all the time. Baseless, 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 right? We've seen this happen a lot of times. It's almost as though, in fact, you've probably seen aggregate tapes where people will play, 10 or 15 or 20 different news agencies using the same term in their broadcast or in their newspaper article, and see the word baseless, baseless, baseless. And you wonder, come on, is somebody manipulating and pulling the strings here? Another one, by the way, that shows up all the time is that climate change. This happened recently, but now we're seeing it again because climate change is now back on the Biden agenda. And that is that it's an existential threat. You ever heard that statement? Existential threat. Like the word baseless used with respect to claims against the possibility that the election of 2020 was manipulated in some way, or that there was cheating. That baseless word, you get the existential threat word also when it comes to climate change. Everybody's using it. Now, that's part of the reach plus frequency equals ubiquity, because the reach is how many people are you reaching. Well, if every one of the media outlets is of one accord using the same language in the stories that they write, that language sticks into the mind of the news and information consumer, and that language basically becomes what they think the story is about and what they are prone to want to believe. One of the most powerful institutions in the news industry, for both broadcast as well as print, is the Associated Press. The Associated Press was founded back in 1846, back in the days of telegraphs. The Associated Press is a membership organization, a nonprofit membership organization. Newspapers, magazines, news outlets, not only in this country but around the world, participate in the Associated Press. They feed stories to it to be disseminated elsewhere, and they receive stories from it. The old telegraph days. That's why they call it, by the way, the wire services, because the telegraph was a wire system. And when you sent a story from out in the West, for example, back to Boston to show up in the Boston Globe the next morning, you basically telegraphed that, sent it across the wires. It's a member organization, AP is, and it provides news and graphic information to its subscribers and members by wire. So They have over 1,700 member newspapers here in the United States who rely on that information. 1,700 newspapers. Imagine the circulations, big and small, of all those newspapers. They have over 6,000 U.S. television and radio stations who are members and subscribers. That's a lot of people who are seeing those stories. And around the world, 8,500 other subscribers in 110 different countries. So this is an agency, if you will, this wire service, that has immense reach. And the international news or national news that appears in your newspapers, or the segments that are devoted to national, international news on your local TV newscasts each evening, or the national news networks themselves, cable or over the air, carry information from this group, all right? The content is not modified. Typically, the television stations run these AP stories unedited, except for length. If you've got some qualifications that you need to satisfy relative to total column inches in the newspaper or time frame in terms of a broadcast, you might shorten the story up, but you don't change the gist of it. You don't change the common meat of that story at all. Content is therefore not modified except for length and for time. Rewrites to meet those things are done, but the information is not modified. Central messages are never questioned, never questioned. So since the reality is that local television stations, local newspapers no longer have bureaus and no longer actually send reporters to Washington, D.C., for example, to cover the Congress or to cover the White House or to cover various committees of government, both in the legislative branch as well as the executive branch. They rely on the wire services, and largely AP is the wire service. There are others. There's Reuters. There are a number of others. But the point is that that's the largest, and they rely on that, and they just basically take it in and become a conduit of that information, which reaches tens of millions of people every day in the United States. So the Associated Press has massive, massive power. Not only that, but since nobody's questioning, that is to say, none of the local newsrooms are questioning the information that comes or choosing the stories, because they're the gatekeepers, of course, but they're not questioning the content of the stories. It goes directly from AP into your eyes and ears. Thousands and thousands and thousands of recipients in every community, every single day, every single hour. How do we know if they're telling the truth? Well, they do their own fact checking. That's how. In fact, they fact check others as well. AP is a fact checker. And they insist, of course, that their fact checking is absolutely accurate and that their reporting is free of bias. But it isn't. One need only read a major AP story, sometimes written by several individuals at once, to find a lot of things in there that just simply aren't totally accurate. They are opinion, not truth. They show the effort to advocate a particular direction, a particular outcome, and that the interest of those reporters is to sell you on something rather than to inform you about something. And the Associated Press thus has such incredible capability. And by the way, other people, even though they don't subscribe to the Associated Press, see things in newspapers or hear things on broadcasts and repeat them in social media as though it's absolute fact. No question about it. Aside from the actual news media itself, there are attitudes within ourselves that have to be examined if we're going to be critical thinkers. We have to objectively analyze our own response to, our own receptivity to news and information. And if you do that, one of the things that you're going to discover, and many researchers have, is that what we agree with, we empower. Think about what that sentence means. What we agree with, we empower. If we like what we hear, we want more of it. We tell our friends about it. If they like what they hear, and tell their friends. And it builds this whole process up. People support their favorite news sources in this early part of 2021, kind of like they do supporting their favorite sports teams. You know, your sports teams can let you down. They can lose a game they shouldn't have lost. They can make a bad choice on the ball field, or so to speak, and what have you. And even though it really ticks you off and it just irks you for a period of time, you're still going to remain loyal to them. You're going to remain loyal to them. And since that is the case, we still get more of this because we don't hold them in check. We don't hold them accountable, the news media. We dismiss them. We forgive them. We say, let's move on. That sort of thing, which of course empowers them. It gives them the ability to do these sorts of things again and again and again, and perhaps more subtly than an error might have been, but they will do these things with the understanding that they do it with impunity. So how do we force this powerful institution that is the media to tell us the truth? How do we get them to do that? I told you in our last broadcast, which was early in this month of January, that we were going to talk about this. The answer is what the answer is in any products or services: consumer power. That's the answer. Think about consumer power. What is it? When individuals choose the news and information suppliers they trust, they influence what the media produces. Because if they don't like what they see, they go away. And if they go away, that affects the ratings, that affects the revenues of those organizations. And they will try as quickly as possible to fix whatever problem we have with them so that we come back. We are consumers of news and information. News and information, though, we don't think of as a commodity like we do groceries, for example, or electricity, or heating oil, or clothing, or automobiles, or homes, or furniture. We think of those things as commodities, right? And there's certain elements that have to be met if we're going to make a purchase from a seller of those particular kinds of commodities. But we do not think of media as a commodity, and yet it is. We have lots and lots and lots and lots of choices when it comes to media. Perhaps more choices today than any of us have ever had in this country in the history of the United States of America. We have lots of choices. So I want you to start thinking in terms of media consumerism. What is that? Media consumerism. You won't buy a car from a dealership that sold you a lemon. You just won't do it. If that happens, you're not going back. And you don't tolerate poor quality in the goods or services that you purchase. The food, the furniture, the insurance policies, the electronics, the plumbing, the electrician, the products and services that we buy every day. If we get an experience with somebody who just plain didn't do well by us, we are not going to recommend them. We are not going to use them again. We might give them a chance to make amends. But if they continue to provide poor quality service or poor quality products, we're gone. We're gone. It's as simple as that. Because we know we got a hardware store down the street if we want hardware. We got another grocery store around the corner. We got a service station, a car wash, whatever it is, that will do the job right if we insist upon that. But the one we're working with right now doesn't. And so, as consumers of news and information, we must apply the same theories, economic theories, to the news media. Now, I'm not talking about boycotts. I don't like boycotts. I'm simply talking about choosing not to buy there. I'll buy someplace else. I'm not going to buy, I'm not going to say, for example, if I like Kellogg's cornflakes, I'm not going to not purchase cornflakes because Kellogg's sponsored a particular news show I don't like. I'm not going to do that. I'm just simply not going to watch that news show. And what happens if a lot of people do that? If lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of people do that, the end result is it's going to shake that outfit up to the point where they're going to have to do something to try to win back that audience or risk going under that news outlet. A perfect example of this happened in just the last 2 or 3 months. Fox News. For 17 years, the most powerful news and information service on the cable, with leading both MSNBC and CNN by a country mile, somehow or other upset the base audience of conservatives that watched that channel. They betrayed on election night when they called Arizona for Joe Biden, and most Fox viewers thought that was premature, because they waited for a long, long time to call other states for President Trump, even though he had a far larger margin of victory going for him than was the situation in Biden's victory in Arizona. That was part of the catalyst, if you will, that started this whole thing off. But then anchors became more biased over the fall with respect to views that were sort of other than what conservative audiences had expected to get on Fox News. And this began to gnaw at them. So the viewers left, and they left in droves. They had other places to go. They could go to One American News Network or to Newsmax or whatever, and they did. And as a result, Fox's numbers plummeted. And now they are dealing with the lowest ratings in 17 years. And they reorganized their programming lineup just this past week, announced it all. And it led with conservative opinion hosts, which had been successful because they remain loyal to conservative viewers, Hannity, Tucker Carlson, and such. But they shifted to others who apparently had drawn the ire of their viewership. Now you could say, well, you know, these people are foolish to go away just because somebody they disagree with had something to say. Is that so? If you like to squeeze the cantaloupe and it has to be a certain softness at the store you buy it at, and it isn't, are you going to buy it just because it's cantaloupe and gee gosh, it's all the same, isn't it? No, it isn't. It's not that. And we know it's not that. We have our own ideas about the things we're going to purchase, the things we're going to accept. And we are very clearly entitled to that. After all, we're paying for that. And if we're paying for that, if we're supporting that, if it's something that's important to us, we want what we want, not what they're offering. That's news conservatism or news consumerism. That's what I'm talking about. Choosing the supplier of your news and information from a consumer standpoint. And using your feet when it doesn't go right. Walk across the street to somebody else if you're not getting what you want at this particular location. And then there is the whole social media area. We'll talk about that next. We'll take a time out here. And you're paying attention to Four Critical Thinkers. And I'm Mike Fitzsimmons. Grateful to have you in our audience.
Well, this is Bloomsday in Spokane. We got about 40 firefighters and their friends and family handing out 40,000 cups of water as the day goes by.
It's a very good opportunity to see the public and support them and help them out and cheer them on during Bloomsday.
It's one of the best things about Spokane is that we have these major events and the whole community comes together not just to participate, but to volunteer and show that they really care about our city and making our city look great.
This type of an event really is emblematic of Spokane because so many people get involved. We have 50,000 people probably running this race. Always has been a very huge event.
Right now we're at the corner of Broadway and Nettleton. It's the last water station before the finish, so people are pretty much dehydrated by the time they get to us. They really need our water.
The water stations are a vital part, especially on warm days like today. It's real important that we have the volunteers to help with that. Without the volunteers, Bloomsday wouldn't exist.
All up and down the course, there are people that are involved in this celebration. It really is a celebration of what Spokane's all about.
Welcome back to For Critical Thinkers. I'm Mike Fitzsimmons. What is censorship? You're hearing a lot about censorship in the news these days. A lot of discussion going on among our friends. What is censorship? It's defined as the suppression or the prohibition of any part of a book or film or news that are considered to be either obscene or politically unacceptable or a threat to security. Related to censorship is prior restraint, which is a form of censorship that occurs before a publication of some information. But we're just talking about censorship now, taking things that have been produced, have been published, have been offered to the public and saying, nope, they can't watch that. There's two kinds of censorship. There is government censorship and there is community censorship. Now, government censorship is highly restrained by the Constitution of the United States, particularly when it comes to the First Amendment. But it's not completely prohibited. Government censorship, supposedly protecting you from reality, does indeed have a role in our society. Indeed, government can, to a limited extent, censor things. Think about that. Government censorship, protecting you from reality. Government censorship for things that are obscene, for example. If something is published that is obscene, the government can rule that you cannot have access to that. Something that is criminal in its conduct. For example, if I were to publish an article in U.S. News and World Report as to how to teach you how to commit income tax evasion, for example, you would therefore be given skills to commit crime. That's not in the best interest of the public, and the government, federal, state, and local, could censor such a thing. And then there is a national security exemption when it comes to censorship. If I were to publish online an article about how to make an atomic bomb, that, of course, would be particularly dangerous, wouldn't it? So government can censor that. Government censorship is restrained, obviously, by the First Amendment. It's not that there can't be any form of censorship, but it's restrained rather strongly. Very, very narrow, requires clear and present danger, and not just the possibility, even the probability that there could be clear and present danger. It has to actually be something that's imminent, going to happen. Speech that advocates the violent overthrow of the United States government, for example, is speech that can be curbed by government. That's a form of censorship. Now, what about community censorship? Well, this falls under the concept of the power of public petition. But what's important, there are fewer restrictions on community censorship, but what's important is that it has to be initiated by other than government. In other words, by the people. Let's say that there's a book on the library shelf at the school where your children go, and a teacher says that he or she wants to assign that particular book to, seventh graders to read. And there are passages in that book that are just simply too mature or adult for seventh graders, and you and your friends and many parents of the kids that go to that school object. They can apply pressure on the school board to ban that book from assignment to seventh graders. That would be a community censorship exercise done by the people. And we have all kinds of examples of community censorship that have occurred over the years. Involving businesses, for example, used to be that the girly magazines that were offered by 7-Eleven stores and convenience stores were right up front by the cash register, usually in a glass case where a 3-year-old could stand there and look at the cover pictures on those magazines. And many communities forced those vendors, those retailers, to wrap them up in brown paper and to put them behind the counter where they couldn't be seen by children. That would be a censorship, but it would be a community censorship, and it would be functional, and it would be fine. Applying pressure on a government agency like a city council or a county commission or a town council or whatever to pass an ordinance, but it came from the people, not from the government. So that's community censorship. What we're talking about when we start talking about social media censorship, we're talking about a form of community censorship. And we're now very much examining the whole issue of social media censorship in our country. It's a new, and in some regards, it is a uncharted form of media, but we have 4 large media platforms that are coming under scrutiny, considerable scrutiny these days: Google, Facebook, Twitter, and Amazon. Now, this form of community censorship is widespread because it affects you and your ability to pass on information to other persons on your Facebook account or things you cannot say on Twitter. I mean, if they can ban a former president of the United States from using Twitter, they can ban any one of us, obviously. But there are some defenses that these organizations, these companies have that we have to face as well. First of all, you're not forced or required to join them. You don't have to have a Twitter account. You don't have to have a Facebook account. You don't have to have use Google when you do your searches. And if you do join these organizations, you agree to certain terms and conditions that you have to live up to because this is a contractual relationship you establish with them. And I know that when you want something online, and this is human nature, you know that this happens frequently, and you get on a particular website and it tells you there's certain terms and conditions, these are our policies, and it says, read these things and then, show that you agree at the bottom of the policy statement. And what do? You scroll down to the bottom and hit I agree. You don't even know what you agreed to, but you did agree. And the fact that you did agree means that you're held to those terms and conditions, whether you understood them or even know they exist. But you can leave that account anytime you want to. You don't have to stay. If you get fed up with your Twitter account, you can go to something else. Just drop off and say goodbye to them. You can do that. Amazon is a slightly different ballgame, however. It's unique in that it offers Amazon Web Services, which is the process, it's the largest host, if you will, of websites for many other social media platforms. So Amazon has a level of power the others do not have. So how do we deal with the fact that these folks are now in the business of deciding what you can say on social media, which is a form of censorship, clearly? It's supposedly community censorship, but given their power, there is a definite public interest, even for individuals, involving individuals who do not have accounts with these organizations. It's a unique situation. It's a 21st century situation, one not foreseeable years back. For example, Amazon dumped Parler recently for violating what Amazon called its terms of service agreement, charging that Parler is unwilling or unable to moderate its platform using the volunteers that they do rather than paid employees. And this happened right after the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol. But it also happened at a time when Twitter and Facebook and Google and others were hemorrhaging customers to Parler. So these people are not just the hosts of the platform itself, they're also a competitor. That kind of changes things. And that places us into a territory that we haven't seen very often over the years, but it began obviously back when John D. Rockefeller owned all the production facilities for oil in the United States, all the distribution capacity for oil in the United States, and had virtually all of the accounts for heating homes and operating industry all under one power, Standard Oil Company. And back then, you may recall Teddy Roosevelt, you may recall the concept of trust busters and the advent of antitrust law. And that's one of the ways in which we can combat this situation, antitrust law. Antitrust law very simply is shutting them down, needing to break them up. We did it to AT&T. We did it to Standard Oil. Remember the Bell system? AT&T was the entire telephone system when landlines were the only thing that existed. And in the 60s and 70s, we broke them up. All the Bell systems wound up being sectional and regional. We allowed competition, and we were all better off for it in the end. Communications works the same way as any other commodity. It truly does. Collusion to silence competitors or competitive thinking. Collusion to suppress opinions that big tech doesn't agree with makes them far too powerful, and something has to be done. Now, they have enjoyed the protection of what's known as Section 230. Section 230 is part of the Telecommunications Act of 1996, indeed called the Communications Decency Act, and it protects Facebook, Google, Twitter, and others from content liability because they're considered to be a platform and not a publisher. In fact, here's the actual language from Section 230. Let's take a look at it. No provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as a publisher or a speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. So they are basically supposed to be a conduit. They just pass through things, all right? But you noticed that of late, they're not acting like that. So when does a social media platform become a publisher? Well, it's when it starts to edit, to suppress or manipulate otherwise lawful content. And that's what they've done. And that is bringing a lot of pressure in Congress to repeal Section 230, to get rid of it as too powerful and able to influence public opinion and manipulate public opinion, to censor some views and to promote others, and to control access, search engines, for example, and to clandestinely sway voter activity to further desired outcomes. Indeed, there is research that indicates that Google's ability to control your search engine use, probably because of the way in which they steered voter information to pro-Democrat sites versus pro-Republican sites in the last election, could have changed as many as 2 to 6 million voters in terms of what they decided to ultimately vote for, allowing people to sue these organizations just as they can any newspaper or broadcast licensee that wrongs them, would be the way in which we could curtail this process. But better yet, there's one other way in which we could handle it, and that's to turn them all into regulated public utilities. Think about this. Is news and information, I'm not talking about ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, I'm talking about the protected, 230 protected social media. Are these organizations a vital enough commodity to be like, for example, hydroelectric power, or perhaps the same as water and electricity and things of that nature? If we turn them into a regulated public utility, then they wouldn't have the power to make those sorts of decisions because the regulations would prevent it. They'd still be private companies. They'd still have virtually monopolistic. Look at the Vista, for example, in the inland Northwest. It's a public utility, but it has shareholders, and it returns a good deal of money on its shareholders' investment every year. Vital information, interactive global communication is like water, is like electricity. It's a commodity. If I can convince you that it's a good idea to think of these things as commodities, then you, as a critical thinker, can anticipate ways in which we can deal with the inequities that are existing in these sorts of troubled times and fix this so that all persons, regardless of what they believe or what's important to them, would be able to benefit in the outcome. And that's what I think we need to do as critical thinkers. You come up with whatever answer you think is the appropriate answer, but it's not going to happen without objective analysis, and it isn't going to happen without the evaluation of these issues very carefully to ascertain ways in which we could best deal with them. I hope this helps you understand some of the options available to us. Don't just buckle under and say we're defeated, we can't fix this. Yes, we can. There are lots of things we can do. Our time is up. I thank you very much for participating in the program today and listening, watching, and I hope to see you again soon. I'm Mike Fitzsimmons, and this is For Critical Thinkers. Have a nice evening.
Thanks for tuning in to this edition of For Critical Thinkers. Join Mike Fitzsimmons twice each month for a chance to share your views about important issues that affect our lives. Stay tuned to Spokane Talks for our next scheduled